If you're looking for a very handy beginner crochet project, your first mesh bag is a good place to start. This bag, even though it looks kind of fancy, is actually much easier to make than it looks. And it has a lot of uses. This bag is good for the beach, for farmers markets, for school, or a trip to the library. And you can also use it to store yarn for your current crochet project. In this video, I will be going over absolutely everything you need to know to make this very useful and cute little bag. You will only need one ball of this Annette Eriksson Eco Cotton, which is available in Australia, but if you are not able to get this yarn where you are, then it's no big deal to substitute with 100 grams or 3.52 ounces of a 3-weight yarn, also known as 8-ply or double knit weight, in cotton or a cotton blend. You will also need 2 sizes of crochet hooks. The main hook is a size G or 4mm, and you will also need a 2.75mm hook. More info about the smaller hook later. If you would like to be able to secure the top of the bag, then you will also need to find a button to put on. Other items you will need might already be in your toolbox, and these would include stitch markers, a yarn needle for sewing in yarn tails and for sewing on the button, a row counter, scissors, and a tape measure. So let's get going. Using the 4mm hook or size G, attach the yarn to the hook with a slip knot. And just to give you a bit of a heads up on how we will be working this bag, we are about to start working stitches that will sit along the bottom of the bag. So let's start by making 4 chains. And now just slide back until you find the slip knot, and we're going to work a double crochet into that slip knot. Make sure you're grabbing 2 of the threads as you go through. And what we have just done here is to make what I'm calling a chain for space. And since this is the very first one, I would like you to mark it with a stitch marker. So just put a stitch marker right through the middle of it, and that will help us out later on. Alright, so let's continue now. Let's make another chain for space by making 4 more chains. And to close off the chain for space, we're going to work another double crochet, but we're going to do that in kind of a special place. So to make that double crochet, start with your yarn over and look for these 2 kind of slanted stitches here at the bottom of the chain 4. So that was these were loops from the previous chain and the double crochet. So that is where to insert your hook. Go through both of those loops, pull through a loop, and finish off your double crochet as usual by pulling through 2 loops twice. So there's another chain 4 space or loop made. And that is basically the pattern. Chain 4 and double crochet into those 2 special loops I've just shown you to make another chain 4 space. So to continue, what you will need to do is just follow that same pattern until you have a total of 16 chain 4 loops. And there, that is my 16th chain 4 space, and this gets a little bit twisted, don't worry about that. Let me just lay this out so you can have a look at what things are meant to look like so far. And now the next step is to make a kind of a U-turn and work stitches all the way back to the beginning. And what we will be doing is pretty much creating a mirror image of what we've just done. So that's easier to show you than to explain, so let's just carry on. After your last chain 4 space from the previous step, continue with another chain 4, and this time, instead of making a double crochet, I'd like you to do a slip stitch, and again it's going to go in these special 2 loops where we went into before. So you're basically skipping 4 chains and you're skipping that sideways double crochet, going into those 2 loops there, and work a slip stitch. Oh, kind of looks like a little butterfly. And that is the pattern for this step. Again with 1, 2, 3, 4. Did I do 4? Chain 4 and slip stitch into those loops there, and so on. Chain 4, look past the chain 4, look past the double crochet, and go into those 2 loops there. So here I am almost finished. I just sort of paused here to show you what things should be looking like. And I'll just continue now with the last few chain 4 spaces. And to finish up this series of stitches, when you get back to essentially the slip knot as being the next place to slip stitch into, well, instead of doing a slip stitch there, I'd like you to finish off with the chain 4 and slip stitch actually in the space. So basically the same place where the stitch marker is. That's where you make a slip stitch. And that is the bottom of the bag finished. So to maybe help you understand what's going on here, if I could fold this in half this way, then these stitches would be on one side of the bag and these are going to be in the front. So as we continue, what's going to happen is we are actually going to work in rounds, and we're going to go round and round and round and round, until finally we get to the depth of the bag. So by working around and around and around like this, we're actually working both the one side and the other at the same time. So two sides at once. So let's get going with what I mean there. So after you have slip stitched into the marked space, you chain 4 again, and we've already gone into the marked space, so find the next space. Let me get that yarn out of the way, and slip stitch actually into the space. So put your hook through the space, draw through the yarn, and go ahead and pull it through to make that slip stitch. And that is basically the pattern from now on. Chain 4, find the next chain 4 space, slip stitch, chain 4, and slip stitch. Just carry on with that. And here I am almost finished with that first side of the bag. I just need another chain 4, slip stitch into that last chain 4 space. And then again we're going to do a U-turn and go back down the other side. And nothing really changes. Chain 4. Find that next chain 4 space, slip stitch, and carry on down the other side of the bag in just the same way as we did before. And I suppose the main thing to be careful about is you should only slip stitch in each space only one time. So if you see you've already got a slip stitch in this space, don't go in there again. Find the next one and slip stitch there. Now I'm just coming close to the stitch marker again to finish up this round. So I'll just put my slip stitch in that space, chain 4, and just in the beginning here things might be a little bit confusing in finding the next chain 4 space. So in this case, at the end of this, kind of the first time we've been doing this, I've already got a stitch in that space. So here's a space that doesn't have anything in it, so put a slip stitch there. And we're going to continue down the other side. So chain 4, and you can see we've got kind of a space there. Ignore that. You want to skip over all that business kind of in the middle there, because that was from the first round. What you want to do is find the next space on the other side and go into it. And also, now that we have come back to where the stitch marker is, if you like, you can start using a row counter. We've just done row 1 and 2. So let's click it to begin round 3. And again, from now on, all you have to do is do chain 4, slip stitch into the next space, no matter where it is. Alright. Just go round and round and round and round and round. And each time you come past the stitch marker, if you'd like, you can click your row counter, because I don't know, if you want to make your bag to look like mine, I did 32 rounds, but you can make your bag as shallow or deep as you'd like. So I'm just suggesting that your row counter should be on about 32 before we go on to the next step. So I'm just going to make myself a cup of coffee and work a few more rounds so that I can show you what happens at the top of the bag. And I'm back, and I got on quite a roll and ended up doing all 32 rounds that I have suggested for this bag. And also I folded the bag really flat, the way it's supposed to be when it's finished, so that I could really see. I know that the stitch marker's there, but I can tell that I'm not actually quite to the edge. So that's how you can tell if your hook is ending up in the right place. Just fold the bag, and it looks like I've got at least one more chain 4 space to do. Let's have a look. Well, it's not quite on the edge, but for this project that's going to be close enough. So we're not too worried about counting. It's more eyeballing things from now on. I promise you it will work out. Okay, so now that you are finished with the mesh section, it's time to move on to the next step where we start putting on the top band of the bag. That means we are going to start doing this top edge. And before we actually start doing this top edge, it's kind of a little transition row that we've got to do between the mesh section and the band, but it's very easy to do. So let's go over that now. So let's just pick up from where we left off, and I suggest putting a stitch marker where we are, just to help us mark the beginning of each round. And it's really quite easy. We're making a transition round, which involves making 2 chains and a slip stitch in the next space. So exactly what we were doing before. We're just doing 2 chains instead of 4. And what that does is it just kind of evens out the top edge. Otherwise it's too floppy. So this kind of gives us a straight line at the top. So just continue doing chain 2, slip stitch in the next space until you get all the way back around to the stitch marker. Here I am, almost finished, just going into the last chain 4 space and in the round with chain 2 and slip stitch into that next stitch where you pretty much where you've got the stitch marker, just to close this last chain 2 space in there. Okay, so you can see now how we've kind of shorn everything up, made a nice straight edge at the top of the bag. Now let's move on to actually making the band. We've got another round to do that is unique. It starts with chain 1, and then for every chain 2 space we're going to work 2 single crochets. So single crochet 1 and one more right in that space, and then in the slip stitch work another single crochet. And these slip stitches can be a little bit stiff, so if you want to work those a little bit looser, that's probably a good idea, which I don't think I did. But anyway, continue. For every chain 2 space is are 2 single crochets, single crochet in the next slip stitch. So that's it. Continue this round until you get back to the stitch marker. I'm just nearing the end, just getting to that last chain 2 space, which looks a little bit crowded in there. Don't worry about that. Alright, and now that that round is done, we've got another really easy round of just start off in the next stitch, working single crochets all the way around. So just 1 single crochet in each stitch. So that's really pretty mindless, just doing single crochets round and round and round and round until when you get back to the stitch marker you see that you have 4 rounds done. So now I'm just getting to the end of the last round, and just a reminder, it should look like you have 1, 2, 3, 4 rounds of single crochets as you kind of approach the stitch marker on the side. So I folded things again flat because the next step involves starting the handle. And to start the handle, we want our last stitch of this round to end up in a particular place. So what I mean is, let me just work a few more stitches to get closer to the stitch marker here. There we go. Actually, I meant to say the hook should be pretty close to the crease line as it is there. Actually, we don't need this stitch marker anymore. Let's get rid of it. Okay, so now that we are right on the fold line, what we're going to do is work 2 more stitches past that. Now the first stitch would be a single crochet, and make the second stitch a slip stitch. Because now what's going to happen is, if this is the crease line, we are going to start working a strap in which 2 stitches fall on the left of the center line and 2 on the right. So that kind of centers the strap on the edge. Again, if you don't understand that, don't worry about it. As long as you have finished 2 stitches past the fold line, you'll be okay. So let's go on to the strap. And very important, when you're now done with the 4mm hook, it's time to go on to the smaller hook. And we use a smaller hook because the tighter we can make these stitches for the strap, the less it will stretch. So I have picked 2.75mm. If you can go even smaller, then do that. But just keep in mind that this is a hook size that's smaller for the yarn. So it might be a little bit hard to work. So if you find things are just, the hook is just too small and the stitches aren't working off the way you'd like, then go back up. It's probably not that big of a deal, but ideally as small as you can work these stitches, the better. Okay, so let's get going. To start the handle, chain 1, turn, and work 4 single crochets starting in the same stitch. Chain 1, turn, And do the same, 4 more stitches, 1 in each stitch. And that's really all you have to do for the strap. Just make this strap as long as you want it. But for kind of a general rule, if you would like this strap to be kind of more a shoulder bag length, then keep going over these 4 stitches until you get to about 25 or 30 inches. If you'd like it a little bit more of a cross body or sitting lower on your body, then maybe more like 35 to 40 inches. In any case, again, just work back and forth until you get the desired length. So I've done a bit more work on this strap, and normally this would be a much longer strap, but I've stopped a little bit early to save time, but also it kind of helps you to see what's going on a bit easier. So in reality, your strap would be much longer. And at this point, there are 2 ways you can continue. So option 1 has to do with if you're happy with not having a button closure, and I'll just point out, you see how the top edge wants to sort of roll a little bit forward. If that doesn't bother you, then you're pretty much done. All that's left is to finish off the yarn from the strap, leaving a tail long enough that you can then use to sew on the other side of the bag. And I'll be going over how to sew that on a little bit later in the video. Your second option has to do with adding some professional finishing touches that prevent this front edge from rolling forward. We're also adding in a button, and we're also finishing off the strap so that each edge looks a bit neater than it did before. So let's get going with how you would go on from here. So there are a couple of things we need to do to prepare for going on. The first has to do with marking where our sort of button loop will go, and that should be right in the middle of the bag. So I've folded the strap in half, remember, because we've got kind of half on the front and half on the back, just to make sure I've got a true sense of where this edge is and smoothing everything out. And I'm just eyeballing where the very center is. Looks to be about there. And I'm going to put a stitch marker. Okay, that looks pretty good. So with that done, the next thing is to make sure we finish up on a particular row of the strap. So what I mean is, and to check this, let's go back to where the strap meets the bag. And of course we're looking on the side that shows. And we're going to trace along the left side of the strap. It's going along this side here. And if the hook is on that same side, then we're okay. In other words, if the hook was down here, then either work another row or rip one row out to make sure the hook is on the same side as the left-hand edge of the strap. So I made a big deal about that because our next step is to work a series of single crochets along the edge here, and we want them to be right side up, so to speak. We want the right side of the stitch to show. Alright, so let's continue on. To work the edge of our strap, continue, and again with the smaller hook, chain 1, and this very first single crochet is going to go around the last one we did on the last row. And just go in there with a single crochet. To find where the next single crochet goes, look for you'll either have 3 vertical bumps like this, and at the top of the 3rd bump there will be a hole there. That's where you go into for the next single crochet. Next we have kind of a line between the 2 rows. So instead of the bumps, look for this line, and again at the end of this line there'll be another hole to go into. Another single crochet. Alright, so you're going back and forth between finding the hole above the bump and a hole above this line here. So you can see how this really neatens up the edge of the strap. If you're still with me, I'm glad to hear it. Alright, so just work your way to this sort of corner. There's something to do here at the very end. I'll go ahead and work to that point. Alright, so I've gotten to the point now where it looks like I've got where I could put one more single crochet on the strap. But here's kind of a little pro tip. Instead of working a single crochet here, I'd like you to do a single crochet 2 together. And here's what I mean. So go in that last hole of the strap, draw through a loop, and now let's pivot around and find the first stitch on the top border, and go in that stitch, draw through a loop, 3 stitches on the hook, yarn over and pull through all 3. And what that does is makes, you can't see it right now, but it makes a nice sharp corner between the strap and the top border. So let's work a little bit further and you might be able to see it a bit better. And to work further, all you need to do now is to put single crochets all along the top of the top border. Let's stop there. See how we've got a nice corner. So as I say, keep working in single crochets all the way around until you get to the stitch marker, and that's where we're going to put a loop that the button will go through. So I'm just nearing the stitch marker, and to make the button loop, go into the stitch that is marked and work 10 chains. And to make this into a loop, come back around to the top of the single crochet, and again we're finding those 2 special loops to go into. So those 2 loops that look like they're on the front of the stitch, go through both of those and work a slip stitch. And there's our little loop ready made for our button. And at this stage, if you want to make double sure, you can check to make sure your button goes through the loop. If it doesn't, either get another button, or I suppose you could make the loop a little bit bigger or smaller, but not by too much, because we want it to position the button in just the right place on the front of the bag. Okay, so I might just leave that stitch marker in just in case I need to go back and change something, but continue working your single crochets along the top edge until you get back to the strap. So I'm almost there. Again, I just have one more stitch to go before I turn the corner. So that's where I'm going to stop, and I'm going to do that single crochet 2 together biseau here again. Alright, so on your last stitch on the top border, draw through a loop, turn the corner, find your first hole on the strap, go through there, draw through a loop, and draw through all 3. There, we've turned the corner again. And continue working single crochets along this side of the strap, same way you did on the other side. Just a couple more stitches on this long edge of the strap, and I think I'll just put one more in that last stitch there just to make it nice and square. And there we go, that's given us a nice pretty edge. And now that the strap's done, we can sew it on to the edge of the bag. Again, let's fasten off the yarn, leaving a tail that's long enough to sew with. Just pull through the last loop, pull it out. Okay, so let's get things lined up here. Now remember, we want to kind of split the handle in half so that half shows on the front and half shows on the back. So I've gone back and made sure I've got everything, the bag, lying perfectly flat so that I can see clearly where the fold line is on this edge. Alright, so now that I know where that fold line is, I can make sure I'm not twisting the strap around, fold it in half, and it's going to sit just on top there. The strap was 4 stitches plus the 2 stitches for the edging, so we're going to count back actually from the edge 3 stitches back. 1, 2, 3. And I might just poke something through there, okay, to mark it. And again, I'm going to line things up, making sure the strap's not twisted. To sew it together, let's do it right sides together. So just flip it forward. I might take my pin out, or my needle. Actually, I'll take my needle and pin those together, just for the time being. And now we can sew this thing on. Oh, I'll just get another needle, thread the yarn. And let's start sewing. Now, to make sure the very corner of the handle is nice and neat, let's go through there and through a stitch on the top of the bag. Do our first stitch. I think that's alright. If not, we can always come back the other way. Okay. Now we're just going to whip stitch, going through the top loops of each stitch and going back to the front, Don't have to be too particular about this. I might take that off now, that's kind of getting in the way. Yeah, and just make sure that this corner has been attached nice and neatly. Let's have a look. Oh, not too bad. There is a little gap there, so let's just go back the other way. And we weave in this end, and we can catch that in. Oh, that's better. I might do a couple more quick stitches just to secure the thread and weave it in. And that's that little job done. Okay, last little job. Let's get the button sewn on. Now I've got the side with the button loop on. That's going to be on the opposite side of where we want the button. Okay, so flip it over, and we can use the button loop to line up the buttonhole. There we go. And just get that button sewn on. I like to use an overhand knot to secure the two ends before weaving them in. But that would be the next step, is to weave those ends in. You don't need to watch me do that. Okay, and there we go. Bag finished. So I hope you enjoyed this project. It's a very useful little bag and very pretty too, with this delicate mesh stitch. Make great gifts, or why not make one for yourself? Well, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you again soon.